Hi, everyone. I'm Leanne West, and I'm the president of the International Children's Advisory Network. And I want to welcome you today to Ask the Experts, where sometimes the experts are clinicians and sometimes the experts are our youth members.
Today, I'm so excited and happy to say that this is a wonderful session that wraps up our whole year of sessions with iCAN Ask the Experts. And we have 4 wonderful co-hosts today that will be with us, joining Dr. Chang, who has fearlessly led us all year long with these wonderful discussions. Thank you, Dr. Chang, for doing that. And our 4 additional friends that have joined us today are Kevin, Ryan, Megan, and AJ Allen will also be on. He's not on quite yet, but I know he was planning on it. And AJ is also retiring at the end of this year. So he brings his expertise along with many, many, many years of working on special clinical research projects and science projects throughout the industry. So we are so glad that we could have him here right before he retires. So that's a really big deal in the adult world when you wrap up your career. And I know he's going to continue on for quite some time. So it'll be nice to see him in a different capacity. So with that said, I would like to just turn this over to our guest speakers. Dr. Chang, do you want to kick off with a little introduction of your role and what you do? And then if you could ask Ryan, Kevin, and Megan, some questions to get them started. And I don't know if anyone has slides, but if you do, you are welcome to share those too, however you best would like.
Well, thank you, Amy and Leanne. Well, I'm a practicing pediatric cardiologist and also data scientist. And my role at my hospital is to trying to make clinical research much easier, in the sense that I think any clinician can ask a question and an answer will be available. So instead of the traditional using spreadsheets and looking up medical records, I think that's been a valiant effort to do clinical research that way, but I think it's just too labor intensive. So my role is to bring artificial intelligence into clinical research so that you can be like Captain Kirk on Star Trek. You can just ask the computer a question and the answer will be available for you. So that's my role here at Children's Hospital in Orange County. I'm very excited to hear what the other researchers are doing and what they think about the future. I have a little one here who wants to be a clinician. So I want things to be very easy for her when she's doing clinical research. Say hi, Olivia.
Hi. Hi, Olivia. All right. Should we call on who needs to go next? Maybe Kevin?
Sure. Thanks, Leanne. Hi, I'm Kevin Anaskovich. I am the CEO of Jumo Health, and I think I got my start in healthcare, maybe not too dissimilar from many people. I didn't start down that path. I studied political science in college, but I have spent a career in healthcare, basically because I was called in from a personal experience. My mother was diagnosed with a rare disease. And there was no approved treatment options. And so a clinical trial was her only, her best bet. And when my brothers and I looked for information, nothing for the layperson, right? The non-medical professional was available that we could understand. And so that really started my journey into healthcare and working with the best to create an informed patient and care circle. Since that time, I've been able to start and sell a few companies. I worked for other health tech companies during their journey and growth periods, and in various roles from sales and product and marketing before joining Jumo Health. And so it's really nice to hear Dr. Chang talk about kind of AI and making things easier, because we really do believe that marrying technology with education can really serve a much better patient and caregiver and circle and everybody around that. So it's also fun to look around and see the other folks on the panel. We have a lot of collaborations with folks already here. And so it's nice to be able to all come together under one roof and share our collective experiences. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions later. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Kevin. What about Ryan? Why don't you go next?
Hi, Leanne. Thank you so much. And hey, iCAN community, I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you for sharing your Saturday morning and Zooming with us. When Amy and Leanne were talking about this, I got extremely excited because I'm a scientist by training, I'm a chemist by training, and I was always a voracious reader. And so my 4Gs have really kind of helped me get to where I am. I've got a growth mindset, always having a generous spirit, both in your time and talent, being grateful for all that comes your way, even the stuff that's a little not so good, it's actually turned out to serve me very well. And then making sure to grab someone along the way. So those are like the 4Gs. As a child, I suffered from a chronic illness, and my pharmacist is actually the one that gave me hope and inspired me. And that's kind of how I began my love affair with wanting to understand more about the clinical research and pharmaceutical industry. I had no clue. It's a big, big, broad world, and there's so much you can do, whether you're creative and you like to do arts and crafts and different things, because there's all kinds of ways in which it makes it easier to tell the stories to others and bring them along the way. So you don't always have to be a scientist, as our other panelist, Mr. Kevin, just shared. Let's see. So as far as my kind of connection to clinical research, I actually had family members that participated in a study. And when I was little, I would see all the little Dalmatian patient retention and education materials, and they had the little polka dots on them because it was actually for a chickenpox vaccine program. My sisters participated in the study, and they never had to experience chickenpox. I had it, but their study and their data contributed to an indication being eradicated around the world. You don't really hear about that. So part of what I do today is trying to bring others along the journey and helping change the mindset that people that look like you or me and people of color don't participate, because the truth is we do. And so I just want to try to help make it easier for people to understand, so that way we can have more data that looks like us. So that way, as drugs are approved and coming across, they can be more safe and effective and actually work. So thrilled to be here, and thank you for your time.
Wonderful, Ryan. Thank you. All right, Megan, how about you?
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Gorski. I work in the Pediatric Center of Excellence at Pfizer. And I actually kind of had an interesting start in my career. I never set out to work in clinical research, which I find is pretty common. I actually, when I was in college, thought I was going to be a forensic scientist, like on the TV show CSI, and I was going to work in a lab and I was going to use science to stop bad guys. But after, a couple of courses of molecular biology, I decided that wasn't going to be for me. In college decided I might want to go to med school. Maybe I wanted to go to nursing school. But when I graduated, I just had to get a job. And I was very lucky to get a job as a clinical research coordinator and laboratory technician at the University of Colorado, where I worked with adult patients who had liver disease and hepatitis C. One of the most exciting things, kind of like Ryan was just talking about, I had the opportunity to work on clinical trials for a drug to treat hepatitis C, which had awful chemotherapy-like treatments previously and now is cured with the medicines that we are studying in those trials. I then moved on to Children's Hospital in Colorado, where I really found my passion of working with pediatrics. I had a really wide variety of different kinds of patients I worked with, from Duchenne muscular dystrophy to migraines to kids who just simply had the flu and had to be in the hospital. So I got a lot of experience with pediatrics, and I really love working with kids and using science to advance medicine so that kids can have better lives. So I ended up at Pfizer in 2019. Long story short, I had a little boy and decided that I needed a career that could be a bit more flexible and I could work from my home. So I work remotely in Michigan. And I was lucky enough to see an opportunity to work in the Pediatric Center of Excellence at Pfizer and really stick with my passion of pediatrics. And so the PED COE, as we call it for short, is dedicated to ensuring we are just doing the best clinical trials for kids and making sure that we have all the processes and procedures in place within Pfizer to do that. And so we also maintain external relationships like with iCAN and stay active in the community as well, and work with lots of children's hospitals and pediatric research institutions. So my passion is peds. I love doing everything that I can with my experience and my knowledge base to ensure we're doing the best studies we can to give the best outcomes to kids. Thank you so much for including me today.
Absolutely. We're so happy to have you. All right. Our next guest speaker is AJ. You want to tell us about yourself?
Sure. And I'm, as I said, I apologize for just showing my picture. For some reason that I do not understand, my camera has me upside down when I turn the camera on. It's never happened before, and probably will never happen again. But anyway, so I started out when I was actually, the age of a lot of you, wanting to help people. I have a very conscious memory of deciding when I was about 5, 6 years old that I wanted to help people, and I sort of fixed on the idea of becoming a doctor because doctors help people. So I through school and through grade school and junior high and high school, I was very interested in things related to science because I knew that doctors dealt with science a lot, and so I got involved with a lot of science programs and research programs like science fairs, and then went to college, and when I was in college, continued my interest in science and that, worked in the lab at a couple of different spots, and but still was interested in becoming a physician. And that was kind of probably one of the second point where I had to make choices about what I wanted to do, because I had already sort of decided I wanted to be a physician, and that stuck with me. But I really liked science, and I liked science more than just seeing patients. I wanted to be involved in research somehow. So I ended up doing a physician scientist training program, what's called an MD PhD program at University of Iowa. And my interest in research was largely around pharmacology, how drugs work and things like that. So I did the PhD in pharmacology. And then because the PhD was on drugs like Valium and benzodiazepines, when I finished the program, I had to look at where was I going to go to residency and what specialty was I going to be in. And those drugs are used in a whole host of specialties. And one area is anesthesiology. Well, I wanted to be able to talk to patients. I didn't want to just have them asleep. So I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. And another area was in neurology, but at the time, we didn't have a lot of treatments in neurology that were particularly curative or that. And so I went through it, thinking about this, and I ended up in psychiatry, partly because it was just fascinating, the idea that people could have these concerns and aspects of things that they worried about or depression or that, and that it literally all was happening in the brain or in the mind. And so that was where I ended up specializing. And along the way, I also had done some work with, or had some friends who were in pediatrics, a couple of the clinical pharmacologists at Iowa. And so when the chance came to do child psychiatry, I combined those and went into child psychiatry. And then I started doing research. I went to NIH, I did some research there, and then went to University of Chicago and was doing clinical work and research. But I wasn't as involved in research as I wanted. And so that was probably the next big jump that I made, because Lilly was working on a drug for ADHD. It was a new drug, a new class of drugs. And if you're a child psychiatrist with a PhD in pharmacology, I used to say, it's sort of a no-brainer. It's your opportunity to be involved in something significant. And so I went to Lilly and started working on that. And because I was child psychiatrist there and had a lot of research training, I ended up helping them with pediatric studies in other psychiatric disorders. And then about 10 years ago, really looking at the landscape globally, I said to the company, I said to our chief medical officer, we need to be thinking more broadly about pediatrics, and we need to be thinking more about how do we do this as a company better, not just every team by itself. And so we created the what was our pediatric capabilities group. It's now our pediatrics hub and our pediatric steering committee, which I've been involved in leading over the past 10 years or so. And at this point, I'm getting ready to retire, partly because in addition to doing the pediatrics, and I've been doing bioethics, and about 8.5 years ago, I started to have my own health issues. I developed multiple myeloma, and so I've been bringing my own patient perspective to research in that time. But it also takes a fair amount of time and effort, and I'm ready to shift and start doing some things with research outside of industry again. So that's my story.
That is so terrific, AJ. We love that. And thank you, Kevin, Megan, and Ryan. Your stories are so inspirational. And I think all the kids can see themselves in what the future holds, which is part of our session today, is kind of looking ahead for the kids who will one day be your future coworkers, your future colleagues, and understand better what that journey is. And as Anthony shared earlier, we're kicking off with having not only a career, but also having the insight to do what you want to do and follow your passions and learn about things that are innovative. So I love that. We do have a question that came up from one of our youth members. Mary Rose wants to know, how much schooling do you need to have to become a psychiatrist? And I would like to also take her question and kind of talk about your schooling paths. So not just in psychiatry, I mean, that would be wonderful to share that, but also, what you had to do for school to get to where all of you are today. So Anthony, I don't know if you want to kick off with that, but we would love to hear from you.
Wow, I'm sort of like at the extreme of schooling. So I did, after high school, I started 4 years of college, and I was pre-med. And I was majoring in molecular biology. And then I went to med school for 4 years. And I had known since I was 15 years old that I wanted to be a pediatric cardiologist. So in the US anyway, if you want to be a pediatric cardiologist, you start off with 3 years of general pediatrics in the residency. And then you go to a 4-year training program to be a pediatric cardiologist. And that's what I did. And just to torture myself even more, I wanted to do not just cardiology, but intensive care. So I had to add another year of training. So that's 5 years of training plus 3 years fellowship training. So after residency, the training is called fellowship. And then then I got my first job after, 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, that's 8. 3 years of residency, that makes 11. 5 years of training, that's 16, before I got my first real job as an attending physician. So that's a lot of years of training. And then since then, I've had an opportunity to pursue education in 3 areas. One is business. Another area is public health. And the third area, which is the most recent one, about 10 years ago, I got an education in the area of artificial intelligence. So I look at education and training as a lifelong process if you're willing to do it. And the beauty of getting additional dimensions is that the return is not additive, I think. I think the return is geometric. So 1 + 1 is 5, because I think having different perspectives is so helpful in clinical medicine.
I think that's really a good perspective. It's a lifelong journey of learning. I love that. Ryan, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. And I have to agree with what Dr. Anthony just said. And that's part of one of my G's. It's that growth mindset. Because I'm like, if you're not growing, you're not going anywhere. And I'm always learning new things every day. I think in light of COVID and everything that occurred, we all had to learn a lot of new things, right? Like I had to learn how to use these Zoom calls to a new degree. And I see my friends like, is it Marikai? You had to learn how to use it too, probably for school. So we're always learning, and being committed to that will take you very far. And I feel like you can learn from so many different ways, so many different people. There's something to learn from everywhere. And I'm a voracious reader. So I'm reading like probably 5 to 6 books now. I just finished up a certification at Cornell as far as formalized training and learning. And in school, I did 4 years to get my Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, and then another couple years for graduate school as well. So really committed, but there's a lot that you learn just day to day. So I'm always learning, always reading, always taking new certifications. And I learn a lot from each of you on this call as well. So I've learned a lot from my friends over at Jumo Health. And I just say, stay curious, because you guys are the future, and what we know today may not hold true for tomorrow. And there's always maybe a better way of doing something, a new way of thinking about it. So it takes all these different diverse ideas and new ways of looking at things to make things better. So that's just my little tidbit there.
All right, Kevin, would you like to go? And then next after that, we'll have Megan, and then AJ can talk a little bit more about his schooling too.
Sure. Happy to. I think that I echo what both kind of Anthony and Ryan just said there. It's not something that you complete and you move on. I do think it's important to see that learning happens organically as well throughout your career. And if you look at it from a perspective of even Jumo Health, we started out just creating condition-specific comic books to explain medical terms to kids. That's it. That's all we did. But as we started to think that there was such a need for additional education in clinical trials, we started thinking that we had to work with the people who were going to get that information and who are running those trials. And so we work with pharmaceutical companies and medical centers and governments. And so now we have a perspective of, because we work with more than 80 pharma customers, hundreds of hospitals and governments in the US and the UK, just being able to have the perspectives of other people in other countries who speak different languages, the perspectives of people just in the United States. We sometimes look at ourselves as this monolithic block, and we're not. We've got lots of different cultures and lots of different perspectives and different areas of our country that sees things differently. And so learning, don't just look at it as having to check into a school. Learning happens all day from different people that you'll meet throughout your life. And I think that that's really helpful. I said earlier that I started studying political science in Washington, DC. I thought I was going to be in politics, but life had a different story for me planned that I wasn't privy to it first. So it's wonderful to be able to start down one path, but keep an open mind as you start to see the different things that will really pull you in. We spend a lot of time once we become adults working, and to be able to have something that's purpose-driven, that's mission-driven, I think it's really important. And echoing, earlier Ryan talked about her 4 Gs. That's really important to have a mantra like that to keep you on the straight and narrow. So I'll stop there, but I think it's important just to know learning just doesn't happen within four walls.
And it's a good dovetail because I completely agree with you, Kevin. I went to college at the University of Colorado at Boulder. I have a bachelor's degree in what's called integrative physiology, which is also pretty similar to kinesiology, learning about how all the systems of the body work together. So I mentioned I first thought I wanted to be on CSI Miami and stop crime with science, but I I changed my major to integrative physiology, and I was surrounded by a lot of people who wanted to go to medical school and nursing school and other health professions because that degree got you all those prerequisites you needed. So I was highly influenced by that. But when I got to the end of the road, when I graduated, I decided I wasn't ready for more school within the four walls. And I did want to get into the workforce. And I feel very fortunate that I fell into something that I ended up loving and I didn't know anything about, to be honest. I had a great manager who took a chance on me as a new college graduate and taught me everything I needed to know about clinical research. And so something that's really been important to me in my career is finding a mentor in all of my jobs to make sure that not only am I, self-serving, learning that I need, taking, courses on the side, reading things online, getting better at Excel, whatever it might be, is to really have a person that I can talk to about my own aspirations or bounce ideas off of, or someone who is in a career or a role that I really want to aspire to, and to talk to them about how they got there. So I feel that that's really how I have kind of escalated my learning throughout my career. And honestly, I never thought I would be where I am today. And I think that's just something that's important to remember. A lot like Kevin's journey is you might start off one way thinking that, this is your life plan, and you might find something that interests you or inspires you and takes you down a completely different road. So I think it's important to keep an open mind in what you might want to do with your career.
That's terrific. And I'd love for AJ to talk a little bit about, the pathway to psychiatry and your schooling. I think that would be really helpful for our youth to know.
Yeah, I'm going to, the first thing I'm going to say though is I'm going to tell you about my pathway, but then I'm going to tell you about sort of try and touch on some other pathways because my pathway is a little bit unusual. So after I finished with high school, I went to college and I was at University of Chicago. And while I was there, I was pursuing an undergraduate degree in chemistry. We didn't have like a pre-med program or anything like that, which was probably good. But I had some extra credits available because I tested out of a number of classes. And so I was, approached by some folks and said, well, why don't you do this program where you can, in 4 years, you can get a bachelor's in chemistry and a master's in biochem. I said, sure, that sounds good. My scholarship's for 4 years. I might as well use it, use it all up. I'm not going to, benefit from it otherwise. And so I ended up doing that. But I also want to note something that I did at the same time, which was I had an opportunity to take some courses that were not science related and that were not focused on just on research or things like that. And, I was in Chicago. The Art Institute is a world-renowned museum. And so I took a course in art appreciation so that I could go down and see the Art Institute. I mean, that was essentially my homework, was to look around the Art Institute and see things, try and learn some things about the what was going on there. And I just want to encourage you folks to think about other sorts of things that you can sometimes study in those settings, because that helps to make you, I know some people that focus only on the science, and then they lose out on other aspects of life that are really important and worth thinking about. So, that's one of my favorite classes still, was having taken that. It gives me some insights. I also took a course in Russian civilization because everybody else was taking courses in Western civilization, and I wanted to be contrarian. And given what happened a few years later with the Iron Curtain and stuff like that, it was a fantastic experience to do that. So that's something to keep in mind. But it was unusual though to do the MD or the bachelor's and the master's in that period of time. And then I went and I did an MD PhD program. So I did another combined program. And that took 8 years. Typically, medical school would be about 4 years. So it's a longer period there than other people might take if they're doing going into medicine or going into psychiatry. But then I had a residency after that, which was a residency in general psychiatry, which normally would be 3 years. Normally would be 4 years, and a residency in child psychiatry, which would normally be another 2 years. But I was able to combine that and then further combine that with the research fellowship at NIH. So I did all that in 5 years rather than, it could have added up to more than that, like 7 years or something on that order. And then I was ready to go out and do things. But if you want to do psychiatry, you could do, the 4 years of college, the 4 years of medical school, and then say the 3 or 4 years of a psychiatry residency. And you may want to do it with another residency. So there's a program called a triple board program in pediatric psychiatry and child psychiatry, which is a 5-year, and you get 3 residencies essentially completed at the same time. But there are also other ways to go into mental health, and that you don't have to be a physician. So people can go through and do high school or do college, and then they can go into psychology. Or there are people that go into nursing. Mary Short, who was at Lilly until she retired last year. Mary was a nurse clinician, and that may be doing an undergraduate degree in nursing and then doing, say, some graduate training on top of that. So there's a number of different ways to do that. And you want to think about what you want to do with that degree. Do you want to see patients? Somebody asked, is there a difference between seeing patients and being a researcher? And there are differences, but it depends what kind of research you're doing. If you're doing research in the clinic, that's not too far from doing research with or doing patient care. But if there are people that do research in the lab, or like I do in companies. We're often involved in designing studies, but we're not actually involved in running the studies, and we work with people that do the clinical piece. So there's a lot of different ways this can vary from one person to another. Hope that answered the questions.
Actually, I think it did. Valeria, if you have anything else, you can unmute too if you'd like to ask a question, because I know you were interested in understanding a little bit more about psychiatry versus medicine. So you're free to do that too. Additionally, I have another question that Caroline asked, and she really wanted to talk a little bit about how our industries have been impacted, or you've had to adapt in your learnings and your work during the pandemic. And I know it's a hot topic, and it comes up a lot for our kids as they're thinking about this and living through what they see at school. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your careers and your learning as well. Who would like to go? Just go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to jump in. I don't know, Kevin, Megan, Ryan, AJ, Dr.
Yeah,
Chen.
let me maybe finish on to something that I was saying earlier. I took that Art Institute course. There are other things that you can do. All of us, I think, have had experience where we've learned in other settings. And so I was focused in psychiatry for much of my career, but the last 10 years I've been focused in, it was child psychiatry, but the last 10 years I've been focused, heading up our pediatrics program on a wide variety of diseases. So it's ranged from oncology to autoimmune to diabetes and even some with COVID. And so that sort of flexibility of learning, constantly going out and looking for additional information, following your interest or what makes you, is curious. You see something and you're like, gee, I wonder about that. And you go follow that odd link that happens to be, you never know what it's going to be, but sometimes you find out some really interesting things that way. So I just encourage people to do that. And as far as COVID goes, it's a blessing and a curse. So it's a blessing in that people have started doing a lot of things online. And so you don't necessarily have to always travel to meetings to see things and that. But it's a curse because we're all doing stuff on Zoom meetings, and it's hard to get the interactions a lot of times with your colleagues. It's hard to network via this, which is another way you learn, which is from your friends and people that you meet at meetings.
Yeah, I think I'll just jump in quickly. What a great question to ask, especially with the folks that are on this panel. When you think about COVID, you think about business and what AJ just said, and how you interact with your colleagues and the whole Zoom dynamic. Now we have a mantra at Jumo Health that cameras on. We want to make sure that we continue to promote the culture that we've spent so long in trying to build. So we want to see the friendly faces smiling back at us. But when you think about COVID, you also think about the vaccines and the trials and the therapeutics. And you've got a representative from Pfizer and Science 37 on this panel who, as we start to think about all of the work that had to go into some 6,800 COVID-19 trials are being run. We've been blessed at Jumo Health to work on a number of them, both direct with sponsors and with the federal government on Operation Warp Speed. But gosh, isn't it interesting that you can think about how all the vaccine hesitancy conversations, all the mental health issues that are rolling into it are all playing out in real time. And we're all trying to learn and speak with one another about how to further promote excellence during a time of uncertainty, right? I mean, that's really why Jumo Health was founded, was to reverse the fear and anxiety that's often associated with a medical diagnosis, and to know that we've all come together in a collaborative, in a collective to try to get beyond this COVID-19. I'm going to stop there because I think Megan and Ryan will be able to share much more about all the work that their respective companies are doing on this front.
Yeah, so from a personal perspective, I mentioned I was at a children's hospital and then I joined Pfizer. So that was actually November of 2019, which is about 4 months before the pandemic. So I went from working in a hospital with lots of people to working remotely. And so I was already starting to learn that when COVID hit. And so I didn't really have to make major changes because I had already started that change. But something that's interesting is I've never met in person anyone that I've worked with at Pfizer. Never once. I've been completely remote, which is odd because even in the jobs that I've held at Pfizer, there would be once a quarter or once every 6 months that people would still get together, but that's still all been on hold. So it's very different working experience, and you definitely have to work very hard to maintain those interactions, cameras on, trying to be really creative and doing interactive meetings or brainstorming, learning how to use all sorts of different technology and tools beyond Zoom. Microsoft Teams is a big one that we use at Pfizer. So really being conscious of that and not slipping into, working with your camera off and not having all those interactions that you would get in an office. And then from the industry perspective, working the hospitals that we work with are very essential to conducting clinical trials, and everyone was impacted by the pandemic and had different policies in place about who was allowed in their facilities, what kind of visits were being prioritized. So there was a lot of adjustment that needed to be done at the company, lots of processes and procedures put into place to make sure that we were still able to conduct our clinical trials, given all those limitations. So it's definitely tough, and I think we're still in it. And I think, it's kind of become the new normal of what we're working with for now. And travel is still only essential. So I've still not met anyone in person from Pfizer, and I'm not sure when that's going to happen. So it's kind of an odd thing to say, but here we are.
Oh, it's a really interesting piece, Megan. And I'm a little bit different, as I've spent the large majority of my career working remotely for almost 20 years, surprisingly. So I've always kind of been decentralized from the main hubs, if you will. So it's been really interesting from that perspective, maybe just not flying as much. But what we have seen is, at least from Science 37, our primary mission is to try to make clinical trials more accessible to patients and providers anywhere, anytime. And that means, being able to leverage your mobile device, for example, to be able to do telemedicine. So what we're seeing is that people have been more comfortable, right? Before, I think, because pre-COVID, people were a little bit more nervous to try to leverage technology in such an interesting way to help fulfill studies. So what we're seeing is there is more of an embracing of technology and home health visits, right? Where the nurse can come to you to take your readings and measurements in collaboration with your providers, and also still working with the main primary brick and mortar sites, if you will. And so we're all kind of working together in what we call an agile model. So it makes it easier for patients. And what we're trying to do as well is trying to make it simpler for folks to participate. And I think the biggest change that I've seen is that every day folks are actually talking about clinical trials, because we saw firsthand what that meant, right? And how it really impacted our lives day in, day out, as new vaccines were coming to the marketplace, as these new pills are coming to the marketplace. And I think an understanding that we need to make sure we've got real representation, because kiddos were affected, right? And when making sure that the vaccines were safe and effective for those ages 5 to 12. And we saw that different racial populations were impacted as well, with those that had access or didn't have access. And so I think it's brought to light a lot of very important topics that we've got away from, but now we've actually had to confront and embrace and figure out what are some neat solutions that we can take to make sure that the color of your skin, or your income, or if you live in an urban area versus a rural area, or you have access to broadband internet versus not having access, how can we overcome those challenges so that way we can level the playing field, so that way everyone can have access to life-saving treatments. So I think that's something that we've seen in a big way, at least from our industry.
That is so terrific. I love that. And I love the idea of, and this is in the chat too, but both what Ryan just said and in the chat, echoing how wonderful it is that we have the opportunity to work with so many different kinds of people from all different backgrounds, with all different thoughts and ideas that they can bring forth, and really creating a much smaller world in many ways. Like, I think that's awesome. I would also like to acknowledge right now that we have kids from around the world on our call right now. So if you're not from the United States, I know there's a few that are on here from Kids Bari. I wanted to give you a big shout out, because I know that this timing is a little bit tougher, and you took the time to still be here, and we love that. So anyways, this is great, because I think what's really nice is that we can all stay connected despite a global pandemic that's happening, and everyone can see one another and participate, which is great. So a question that comes up often from our kids, and one that I saw Ed wrote into the chat and AJ started to answer, is just staying motivated. So we hear that a lot from the kids, that sometimes with all this online stuff, it gets a little bit hard and a little bit difficult to continue, especially when school is online and all extracurriculars are often online, and kids are really being thoughtful about not, spreading germs or spreading COVID. I would love to hear some one answer, short sentence tips that the kids could take and apply to their lives going forward from this session. So how do you stay motivated in your schooling and in your goals and your career pathing? What's one really good thing that you do every day that you could share? And Dr. Chang, do you want to start first?
I think a deep appreciation for everything that we have in this country, and not forget that, because I think we really take a lot of things for granted. So I think we can't do it now, but I think traveling and seeing other countries, particularly third and fourth world countries, just builds that inner appreciation that we have so many resources and so many opportunities like no other place on the planet. I think that's very motivating when you realize that you're in a very lucky place.
I agree. I feel practicing gratitude is so, so important. And, part of being successful is to reflect on what you have. So that is such a great observation. Megan, would you like to share something?
Yeah, I would say two things. So one is having an inner mantra, kind of like Ryan's talked about. Mine has always been, it's all about the kids. So whatever I'm doing, even if it seems not so much fun or too hard, it's all about the kids. It keeps me going. The other thing is take a break. So I will just go walk my dog. It's a good thing about being able to work from home is just get outside, get some fresh air, take a mental break, whatever you need to do, put on some music, do a jigsaw puzzle, have something that you can go to clear your head for a minute, I think is super important to keep that balance.
I think that's so good too. Those are really helpful tips that we could all apply, especially just, getting outdoors, even just for a second, getting that breath of fresh air.
Even if it's cold in Northwest Michigan, still the fresh air is good for you.
It is. It is. Kevin, would you like to go next?
Sure. Two things from my side too. Looking forward to something always seems to help. So it's balancing the aspirational with the practical. So we all have day jobs and we have to kind of show up and we have to work and we've got to, and that can help, right? So plan something, plan your work and work your plan, stick to a schedule, creating something like that can often help, but don't forget to think beyond the here and now. Think about where you might want to go after this pandemic, or what you might want to do. Think about the sorts of, puzzling is great. My wife loves to puzzle. And so at first, reluctantly, I've been pulled into the puzzling thing, but now I really do like it because it's quite challenging and it gets you thinking about something else other than what's traditionally in front of you. It's been difficult for some folks to walk away from their computers, right? You don't have to turn it off and then get in your car and travel. And so now when it's constantly just in the other room, you might want to kind of go back on your computer or grab your smart device so you can kind of continue to check in. So balancing the practical need and the aspirational, I think has been helpful for me, at least over the past 20 or so months.
I couldn't agree more. And also, I'm a puzzler. I have one going on in my room right now. We have it in a daylight window so that during the day, if you have 5 minutes, you can walk by and find at least one piece. It's going to take us all winter to do this. It's a huge 5,000 piece puzzle, but you can put one down and feel like you accomplished something. It's a small reward, but it works. So, we do the same thing in our house. I love that. AJ, did you want to go next? I know you wrote some things in the chat, but maybe you could share a couple things too.
Yeah, so what I wrote in the chat was really to not think of this as one, long-term goal, and you until you get to that end, you've never achieved it. It's break it up. I forget the saying. It's something like you don't try and swallow something whole. You try and break it up into bite-sized pieces, and for some reason the idea of swallowing an elephant comes to mind. You need to cut it up a little bit if you're going to try and do that. But the other thing I think is just being curious and following connections that you come across as you're going through things. If you're interested in something like science or medicine or engineering or art or things like that, follow the different pathways that you come off of it. It shouldn't be that you want to be focused on what you're doing, but you also want to try and learn from the different things that are out there. And some of the best reading that I've had has been, I'm working on something and I kind of get off into a tangent with it. One of my original area of training was in chemistry, and then biochemistry, and then I got into pharmacology. And there was there's a way to connect all of those. And then I went from pharmacology into neuroscience and benzodiazepines. And then I went into psychiatry and child psychiatry. And from those, I also got into bioethics, which continues to be an interest of mine. From working in child psychiatry within Lilly, I ended up working on more broadly on things related to pediatrics. Because I was working on things related to bioethics, I got interested in some things related to data sciences and the ethics related to that. And there's just these little connections that lead you off into a whole string of different things in your life that are potentially, new areas of interest and even areas of expertise. I never expected, for example, to do stuff with studying drugs and their potential for being abused. One of the things that happened when I was working on our ADHD drug is I did a study that was related to that. And all of a sudden, I ended up being the company expert on that. And not only that, I ended up having an influence on the FDA guidance based on that study. It was totally, not planned, not expected or anything, but it was something that was an important area that I was able to make a contribution because I followed those side interests.
I love that. That is so powerful, following those side interests and seeing where it might lead you. You just never know. And that just kind of goes along with the theme of learning constantly and always being open to that. I love that too. So Reese had a good question in here. Reese has moved on to our young adult program, and I know she's in college because I happen to know her very well. This is my daughter, but she had a great question, and I would love to hear this too. If you could go back and tell your younger self something about your career, what would it be? And maybe it's something you didn't realize until you had that aha moment later on. So Dr. Chang, I would love to hear this, and then we'll just go around and everybody can answer and help inspire us. I think this is a really good idea.
I wrote in the chat that if you're interested in, if you have two passions in your life, and I have always had at least two, if not more, people always try to tell you, focus on one, don't be distracted by the other, or they're skeptical that you want to do something that is very, very new and unproven. And I learned not to listen to the skeptics as much as I listen to my inner self, because sometimes you may be the person to be onto something. And I learned also from reading from people like Steve Jobs, and sometimes you just have to trust your inner self and have mentors that believe in you and think you can do the impossible, rather than being really distracted or discouraged by the skeptics, which there are many in the world, who may not think you're capable or onto something very different and new.
Anyone else? I think that answer ties in nicely. Oh, Megan, go ahead.
Good.
I would say it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay not to know what you want to be when you grow up. I think that, like I talked about, I thought I wanted to be a crime scene investigator. I thought I wanted to be a doctor. I thought I wanted to be a nurse. I didn't do any of those things, but I still have had a very successful career, and I'm very happy with where I ended up. So it's okay to make a wrong turn and go another way. And it's okay to not know where you want to be in the next 5 years. I've interviewed a lot of people during my career for various jobs that I've hired for as a manager. And I think I actually respect the answer that people don't know what they want to do in the next 5 to 10 years when that question comes up. Because I think it's very honest, and it just shows that we're always learning and evolving and growing. So I think while it's wonderful to know since you were 5 years old or so that you wanted to be a doctor, I think that it's also okay to not know that and to find your path along the way.
Yeah. There's been so many great pieces that have been shared, and I'd say the biggest thing I would tell myself is it aligns a lot with what Dr. Chang was saying, and it's being comfortable with your inner voice. Only you know what lights you up from the inside out. And when you're embarking upon a very ambitious journey, whether it's becoming a physician, whether it's becoming a researcher, or all the years in between, it's that still small voice that'll tie you to something bigger than yourself, that'll help pull you along the path so you can take the one bite at a time. And one of the biggest things that I do every single day is I journal. What is one thing I can do today, right, to take action on something that's a dream? And you can have multiple purposes. I've had multiple different careers, and they each have added like a different flavor and a layer. And, I used to be someone that was very driven with, I have to do this in exactly 5 years, and exactly 10 years, and exactly 7 years. And then I learned after I started hitting some of those goals, once you hit a certain space, it's really learning how to enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey of life. And some of those things can help you with being very ambitious and driven, but sometimes it's good to be open to other pathways and explore different things. So it's okay to not have it all figured out all the time and to make mistakes, because the mistakes add value to your life.
AJ, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, I put in the chat, there's 2 books that I've read recently that I think are really, really good ones, actually, for young people to read. We need to get Adam Grant to write them, and, so they're at the level more for high school, as opposed to, I don't know what level they're at, but it seems like they're fairly advanced, but they actually are pretty easy to read. And one of those is about rethinking things, and I think that goes along with the the comments. Even if you started out early on wanting to do a certain thing. So I started out with a 5-year-old's idea of being a physician. Okay, whatever a 5-year-old thinks a physician is, I boiled it down to helping people. But along the way, I got involved in doing some science research and things like that, and that kind of steered things. When I was 5 years old, I had never heard of doing an MD PhD. Well, but by the time I got through college, that seemed like the best thing for what I wanted to do. And so there was constantly kind of a rethinking along the way. And there were times that, I wondered, do I really want to be a physician or not? Do I just want to, be a lab scientist? And, the thing is that constantly rethinking those, one of the points Adam Grant makes in his book is that actually leads to better outcomes than if you just sort of set it and forget it and, try and do one thing throughout your entire life, or try and just take one approach. We always need to adapt and change, and that, whatever I thought an MD was at 5 years old, what I know now, having lived my career and seen everybody else doing different things as MDs, is that being an MD, there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do as a physician. There are physicians that don't even do anything related to medicine, but presumably they, what they've learned throughout their career has still been helpful to them as they moved into other areas. So I think it's just important to do that. And the other thing is that the piece on originals was that, one of the points that they make or Adam Grant makes in that book is, everybody has potential to being an original contributor. Sometimes we think that the only people that are able to come up with really great ideas are the people that are like super smart. Well, that's not necessarily true. The people that come up with great ideas are actually the people who come up with a lot of ideas, because the fact is, everybody strikes out now and then. Steve Jobs had things that didn't work out the way he thought they would. Albert Einstein had hundreds of patents, but there's only about 10 of them or so that are really significant and the ones that we remember. And so, some of it is just, keep trying and keep coming up with ideas and things like that, and not being afraid to put them out there.
That is so true. I appreciate all of that wisdom and advice so much. We are at the top of the hour, so I wanted to say, first of all, we have AJ Allen on here. He is retiring at the end of this year, so if you'd like, we can give him a round of applause and just say thank you for always being such a great support of iCAN, and hopefully in your retirement, you'll be able to come back and join us. We would
I'm
love.
retiring from Lilly. I'm not
Yes.
retiring professionally.
Yes. We are so glad, though, that you're here and spending some of your time with us. And to all our panelists, Kevin, Megan, Ryan, Dr. Chang had to leave to go to the hospital. So we are so appreciative of all of you being here and sharing your Saturday morning with us. It has just been wonderful. And to all of our kids, thank you for getting on today and being a part of iCAN. We appreciate you, your expertise, and all your wisdom, and what you're going to do as you go forward with all this knowledge. We're so excited. We do have our schedule out for next year, 2022.
What?
Yes, so we are so excited. Mary Claire, you'll have to sign up. We'll have the events posted this month so you can start RSVPing right away. And to our guest speakers, if there's a topic that you would like to come back to and talk about, you can see all of them, and we would love to have you join us at any time. And just wanted to say thank you and have a great day. And thanks to Leanne for sharing her advice. The chat will also be included in the video, so you'll be able to see all the comments that we collected today.
Yep. And I just want to say that if there are other questions that didn't get answered today, feel free to talk to me or Amy or Claire, and we can get you some of those answers to your questions. So we are always here to answer questions. I know our panelists give so much of their time, and we just so very much appreciate all that you all do to help make iCAN wonderful.
Have a happy holiday season, and we will see you in the new year, and hopefully the pandemic will continue on and we'll be through this, and we can't wait to see you in France in the summer. So fingers crossed. That's right. We are all cheering for that.
Yes.
And have a safe and happy holiday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.